So I ask you to welcome her, the unmistakable Nigella Lawson.
The most marvellous introduction, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I do have to warn you, obviously, it's a fabulously tough audience here tonight. I think the tickets for this event sold out in about 14 seconds flat, so you shouldn't view these people as representative of your entire fan base in New South Wales or Australia. They're just the most prehensile-fingered ones with the bookings. So, but welcome to Sydney.
Well, I love Sydney, and I have to say, I was going to say childishly excited to be here, but I think actually, hysterical with excitement. There are various things in life you never think will come to pass, and being on the stage of the Opera House in Sydney is one of them. And it's a thrilling moment. I only wish I could sing.
Well, look, let's see how we get along, shall we? The choristers behind us might chip in or something. I feel that these poor people behind will just see a sort of mass of hair from both of us. So we'll try and do a bit of swiveling from time to time.
Yes, I can swivel like this quite easily.
Perfect. Look, where does Australia stand for you on the scale of countries that are difficult to visit because you can't do anything without people stopping you? I mean, do you choose holiday locations on the basis of low cable television coverage, for instance?
I don't really think about it like that. I mean, I have to say that I always feel worried that everyone thinks I'm much more famous than I am. I find it very, very easy to walk around the streets unmolested. And I mean, being short-sighted has always helped, but also what I will
so much
say,
you don't know.
but what I will say is this as well, which is, I think for certain people it might be tiresome, but there's something about writing about food is that one, the people who are interested in that are the sort of people I like speaking to. And the other is, there is a sense, I think maybe because I write in my voice and when I do television programs I'm not scripted, people sort of have an idea of who I am. And I don't feel it's like a starry thing. It's much more about sharing things. People will talk to me about the food they eat. And I'm a very, very nosy person, so I always want to find out. Obviously, people only ever want to take photographs when I haven't got any makeup on and my hair's dirty.
Or when you're wearing a long-line bathing suit at Sydney.
My burkini.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, but
everyone was thrilled.
It looked better on, really, I promise. But the thing is, in many things, my laziness is much greater than my vanity, so I'd rather walk around looking like that. And actually, it's a normal thing to do. People don't seem to mind when I talk to them, looking, quite unspeakable. So I think it's not. I mean, it's certainly not like being a politician when everyone hates you, and it's not like being a pop star when people are hysterical. And so that really, I feel that talking about food, writing about food is a conversation. So it's only right and proper that conversation is continued wherever it can be.
You said a second ago that you're very lazy, and you mentioned this in most of your books and repeatedly throughout your television programs. And I think you seem very unlazy to me.
I have a theory.
Frenetically busy, obviously. So how does that work?
A theory about life, which you can challenge if you would like, which is that the people who often work the hardest are naturally the laziest.
Right.
Because we know that unless we really kind of drove ourselves, we would be very happy, lying in bed, reading novels, drinking cups of tea, eating toast, the odd bowl of spaghetti, maybe even a roast chicken. But nevertheless, that, in a sense, I feel that I have two speeds, which is full pelt or sort of almost comatose.
So is it like that thing?
I'm never moderate in my activity.
That is fascinating. So is it like that old saying about inside a plump person is a slender person battling to get out? So inside your frenetically busy person is a very indolent one wanting to have a sit down.
But I won't sit down, lie down.
All right.
And I indulge that person often.
How much do you really eat in bed? Do you really eat in bed a lot?
Yes. Do I eat or did you say eat in
yes. bed? I'm sorry, Australians.
I do.
Who was it that once described the Australian accent as a collection of speech defects? I'm sorry. I apologise.
No. I just couldn't hear as eat or read.
Yes.
They're very similar words. No, but
no, I'm more interested in eating. Well,
both. So both. Yes, I do. Especially at the weekends when I go down and I cook for myself and I enjoy that. And occasionally I do sit at a table and I feel immensely pleased with myself. And then more often than not, I just drag my food back to my cave. And a friend of mine who is much more proper than I am, she said to me once, "Without a tray?" And it's certainly true that I do, and I do keep by the side of my bed, because my bedroom's not on the same floor as the kitchen. So by the side of my bed, I have learnt to keep a little collection of condiments. It's not meant to be funny, it's very helpful.
So mustard, I assume, because
English mustard, Maldon salt.
Quite right. Or a bit crunchy in the bedclothes, but yes.
Yeah, I know, but that can be lived with. Unsalted food is worse.
Sure. Yeah.
And although I do take that fabulous pink salt home every time I come here. That's very soft.
Murray River.
That's very the Murray River salt. That's very soft. And I also have Tabasco, although I don't always know whether Tabasco is the right sauce. And I have as well a kind of thicker chili sauce, hot sauce, plus soy sauce. and the ridiculous thing is one of my great luxuries is that I like very expensive and gorgeous bed linen, and then I ruin it by dolloping soy sauce all over it.
There is probably a business model based entirely on you in the Manchester world, I assume. Look, now seems the right time for me to ask, because it's something I've always wanted to ask you. Do you have any sort of secret ingredients of shame that you love using, even though they're a bit embarrassing? I ask because I really, every now and again, I don't mind a spoonful of curry powder in something, and I love a tinned smoked oyster, even though I know it's wrong.
Oh, I have absolutely no shame about any ingredient I use that is not considered, exactly top drawer. And I've always been very open about it. I use chicken stock from concentrate, and I've always made that clear in my books. Nigel Slater, who you may know, calls me the queen of the frozen pea, an accolade.
I would defend a frozen pea.
Yes, I defend
unto
a frozen
death.
pea. I have also been known to use tinned mushy peas.
Ooh.
Yes, you see, which is really, you only have to open a can, the amount of food colouring in them.
Yes.
I mean, it's as if they were concocted on The Simpsons, in that part.
Where do you stand on the tinned mandarin segment? I mean, not directly on top, obviously.
The thing, I've used tinned peaches in a cake and tinned pears. But tinned mandarin segments remind me of childhood. So I have a fondness for them, but I don't get them very often. But now you've planted that seed.
Well, the thing that puzzles me about them is, because I've used them on tops of tarts and things, and also in little compotes when I can't be bothered peeling the membrane.
I have never peeled
but
a
you
segment.
have to if you want to do a compote
orange.
that looks all pretty, because otherwise it's all membraney.
Yes.
And talking of business models, how is it worth anyone's while to peel 30 mandarin segments and enclose them in a tiny tin and sell them for 50p?
I think we know that it involves, enormous exploitation, and we should
Yes,
avoid
you're quite
Mandarin
right.
segments on those grounds alone.
You're
I'm
probably
not.
right.
I mean, really, if you think about it.
I think we're making some real social progress
so
here.
I'm. But the terrible thing is that I have a terribly, well, it's no secret, but I have a very camp kitsch side. Therefore, sometimes if I feel an ingredient is really disgusting and everyone thinks it is very low rent, I feel compelled to use it. And then after a while, I think, I'm not sure if I like this, but I can't stand the sneerers. I'd rather be sneered at.
And you love a pun as well. I must say I'm completely thrilled by Jackson Pollock in your new book, which is, Pollock is this sort of...
Fish.
It's a fish. And they renamed it, didn't they, for a while, because Pollock sounded so uninspiring.
I know, they renamed it. Well, obviously they tried to name it in French, but of course in English it doesn't work, which is Colin.
Colin.
It's like calling a fish high,
So delicious sounding, though.
Colin. Which is also quite confusing, because I think there's a part in the Loire when it suddenly means hake or something, so it changes. Yeah. But anyway, so pollock is very, it's a sustainable fish that we have a lot of. It's not, I don't know, it's not one of those fishes that, you grill lightly and then put a bit of extra virgin olive oil and just the merest bit of salt. No. And
which is why you made a painting out of it.
So I thought, because of the painter Jackson Pollock, I had to do it. So I created a recipe for it, just so that I could. Then I made a bit of spinach sauce, and I made a charred red pepper sauce, charred red peppers out of a jar. And so then I could daub it and spray it and make it look like a painting. And actually, I did look at a painting, but to see which like me model on that painting or not. Then I thought I was really going, too far beyond. Yes, I like a culinary pun as well. So I've got a sweet potato macaroni cheese, which may I just say works surprisingly well, and I add feta, so you have that sourness and saltiness to counter that rich sweetness of the potato. But what I really love about it is that when you see it photographed or when it comes to the table, it looks like it's plastic from a packet because it's such a bright orange, and yet it is the earthy goodness of a sweet potato. And I like that. So in the same way as I've got a recipe for pasta snails in garlic butter, because really when you eat snails in France, the best thing is that parsley garlic butter. So I thought I may as well use the snails, but I like that idea of, as I say, a culinary pun, a visual pun, a culinary pun, and I have to stop myself every now and then.
Have you ever discarded anything because it's too silly along those lines?
I wish I could say I have, but I'm afraid there's documentary evidence of all my excesses.
Now, you have a new book out, Simply Nigella, and your new series that goes along with it. And in Britain, of course, the series became unshakably controversial straight away. I speak, of course, of the great avocado on toast scandal of 2015.
Avocado Gate.
Yeah, Avocado Gate.
Well, yes it did and yes it didn't, in the sense that when I was in journalism, when anything happened, we would have a saying, and this, I don't know if I hasten to add, it was broadsheet journalism. Twice, if you notice something twice, it's a coincidence. Three times it's a feature. And I think these days, if there are 3 tweets showing horror, it becomes a tabloid sensation. And in my first program, introduced avocado toast, saying, look, this isn't a recipe, but it's something I love eating, and I did a few things with it, and then it was like, a recipe for avocado toast? This is the most terrible thing ever. That is in my book, but only because I've done the recipe for some pickled radishes to go with it, because I feel this great need to pickle at the moment. I asked a Greek friend of mine, I said to him, I just can't stop pickling in everything. And
there must be a Latin term for that.
No, well, he's Greek, so I said, what would it be in Greek? Just like, all conditions or something, mania. And he said, torsomania. Oh, so I am a torsomaniac.
That sounds fine.
So in that sense, so there have been those so they're, to me, I find them slightly false outrage.
Right, yeah, I'd accept that. But the avocado has some funny properties, doesn't it? But did you see that huge debacle that happened quite recently in the US, where the New York Times tweeted a simple recommendation that people should put peas in their guacamole.
Excuse me. I had that recipe in Nigella Express many, many years ago. I didn't like to say that at the time.
They didn't attack you.
And no. So the New York Times didn't even have originality on its site.
Oh my God.
And I have to say, I did use tin mushy peas for it.
Oh, no. Are the readers of the New York Times aware? They must be, because you've got a column there
for the New York Times, and I say that as an erstwhile columnist for the New York Times, and I love their food pages, but nothing exists beyond the New York Times. That's fine. That's the way it should be. It's a holy temple. Yes, people were outraged.
And the president was obliged to weigh in on this debate about whether there should be peas in guacamole. I can't remember which way he jumped.
Do you think it's sensible to comment on what happens in America?
No,
really?
Not at all. But I mean,
really?
They go so crazy. Yeah, fair enough. That is a fair call. But they go crazy about food there, particularly with politicians. I mean,
yes.
there was this sort of widespread fear of the oppression of Michelle Obama, who was growing vegetables at the White House, and that she was dominating everybody and forcing their children to eat kale.
Yeah. But the thing is that people do feel very. I can understand that in a way, guacamole is a particular, a particular recipe, and I suppose, fiddling around with it might seem disrespectful. I mean, I quite like it, but can I recommend it to you? I have a version, I'm going to say rockamole.
I know what you're going to say.
You're going to say rockamole?
I'm going to say brockamole.
No, I've got brockamole now, but I have also got one version which adds blue cheese, which is called rockamole for obvious reasons. God. And during the World Cup once, I had to do a version called soccermole. Still at the puns, they carry on. However, yes, the brockamole, which I love, which adds broccoli. But in a sense, I think that I think that America does have a tradition of commenting on food as well. Wasn't there which politician, was it Bush, who once said that he didn't like broccoli, and there was a huge thing with all the broccoli farmers. So then that had to be dealt with. And
then Obama said that he really liked rocket, and then he had, or arugula as they call it there, and then he had to go and ritually eat every other form of lettuce because he'd offended the non-posh ones. But my favourite of all time is John Kerry, who went to Philadelphia, and he ordered a Philly cheesesteak, which is this hellish concoction of sort of squirty meat stuff with, and it's traditionally served with something called cheese whiz, which is an aerosol cheese because, of course. And he asked for it with Swiss cheese instead. And he was in so much trouble that he had to go back and eat 10 of them with the squirty cheese just to get back on top in Philadelphia.
But, but in a sense, you must, as you know, politicians also often do use food in a way to show they are people who are just like everyone else.
We have a Prime Minister who ate an onion raw on television. It didn't work that way for him.
So
it didn't work that way.
No, but you know what I mean? So I think that does happen a lot, and I think that maybe I'm trying to think whether that sort of thing could happen in the UK. Well, we had a bit of an outcry once. I don't think we could spend the whole time talking about both peas, mushy peas, and avocado. But this,
I'm going to let her run
this is my last. This is my last comment on the subject. I'm sure this didn't happen, but there's an apocryphal story that Peter Mandelson, as you know, who was in many ways considered the spin doctor, sort of the thought. The architect of New Labour went to the north, was in the north where, fish and chips and mushy peas are the thing, and apparently said, have fish and chips and can I have some of that guacamole? And there was a huge outcry then. I was so maybe 'twas ever thus.
Well, look, the thing is, though, see, all your writing and broadcasting about food is, I think, premised very deeply on the idea of not making a fuss. You're not a terrible fusser. And yet people do fuss about food, don't they? I mean, they fuss when a classic recipe has been interfered with. There's a current and developing, I think, pattern of people worried about the idea of cultural appropriation.
Yes.
When there's sort of university orientation weeks where they serve tacos in the United States, people get cross about it. And it's awkward, isn't it? Because when you borrow a dish from another culture, you're borrowing something quite precious to that culture. But then the tradition of food is that it then kind of becomes yours a bit to do as you like with.
Yes, but what I think is that food is very much like language, and it can only carry on if it's living. And I think that, you know, the French, for example, codify language very stringently, and also have very much a notion of, you know, these are traditional foods and you mustn't change them. But the difficulty is that isn't really how people live, and you can decry neologisms as much as you like, or perhaps that food has become, as it has in France, too Italianified. They don't like that. But the difficulty is it's futile to try and stop it, because language develops as it will, and so does cooking, because the truth is that usage dictates development. I mean, it is to try and make the rules, to make rules govern people's behavior, is to misunderstand what a wonderful, live, unfurling thing language is and food is. And of course, food and language also are political, and that's social history. So as people travel, or as people understand more about different ingredients, and spice routes made a big difference, and the fact that now food is carried by aeroplane, and what food is accessible to certain groups of people and what to others, all this makes a big difference to how we cook and eat. And I do think, in a way that there's a great misunderstanding in food about authenticity. And I think there's not always you can't trace everything back to one recipe somewhere, and anything that deviates from that recipe is inauthentic. And I think that I think the thing is, I understand it. I think human beings are essentially tribal. Therefore, a food belongs to a certain tribe, even if it's just the people in one street. You know, for example, I'm in England, you know, that there's huge arguments going on when you have scones, whether you should have the cream first or the jam first. And
that's a sensible debate.
And you know, if you're from Devon, and both in the West Country, if you're from Devon, I believe then you would put the cream first and then the jam, and in Cornwall they put the jam first and then the cream. Now this matters an awful lot. As I say, it's tribal.
Which way do you swing?
Well, I'm afraid to say, although I am more Cornish than Devonian, I do the cream first, because in my mind it's much... Would you like to hear why? It's because, to me, clotted cream, I mean, look, I don't mind it go before and after, as far as I can say. I love it such a lot. But the reality is that for me, it's really like a version of butter, and you put it on what is really like a quick bread, and then you put the jam on. And also, I know you're shaking your head, but it's much better. To me, so I've always done that. And that's another thing. It is about what one's always done. And it's much easier to put the jam on top, and you put the jam first, and then you try and put the cream on. You drag the jam, whereas the cream is heavier.
See, I am exactly the other way.
Well, quite. So in all these things, it's not about right or wrong. We should let our own tastes dictate how we eat and what we eat. So it really, you know, obviously some people get very irate and they feel that matters. And, well, it does, but what matters much more is you eat the way you like eating, I think.
So what do you think your tribal food is? I mean, do you have one? I mean, you were raised with lots of European cooking and sort of Jewish tradition, and then you spent some time in Italy, of course, romantically as a chambermaid, eating vats of pasta and so on, and you're obviously very influenced by that time.
Yes, I was, but I think for me, the chicken is central, as it is in a way for so many people in so many different ways and in different cultures. And in particular, roast chicken is, for me, something that is so basic that I always have to have a chicken ready to roast, and
on the bedside table.
Well, my mother always roasted when there were lots of us, so it's not quite as terrible as my mother always roasted 2 chickens, one to eat then and one to have cold. She couldn't bear the idea of not having cold chicken in the house. And she would always cut a lemon, put the lemon inside the cavity of the chicken and smear it with butter. I now prefer olive oil, not extra virgin olive oil, of course. And some salt, and I like that, sometimes with garlic and anything else that goes with it. But really, for me, I think the food that is my family language is a chicken that's cooked on the hob in a pot with vegetables that I call my mother's praise chicken. It's halfway between poached and braised, and I always say it's cooking it and eating it is like an act of devotion, and
that's the aroma as well.
That smell, and very, very much not a food stuff for the Instagram age, but unphotogenic food is often the most delicious, and in a way I love it, and I cook a lot and have done forever, and it's our family food. But this is one way in which I think food matters and home cooking matters, which is my mother died young, and it's a way that my children can taste her food. And that seems to me to be behind so much of what is very potent and poignant in families everywhere.
And you've made that recipe, quite. I was just going to make the point that recipe is a soup in your new cookbook, which I haven't made for my children yet. But it's that concept. And you mentioned again leaning down on the chicken until its bones are broken.
Yes, I like
something that you really.
I like a bit of surgery.
Yes,
but I don't have any knife skills, so I have to do it by brute force.
Right.
No, but yes. So that was a recipe that was in kitchen, but I've done a version of it, but it is so. In a sense, I've taken my mother's recipe, but done something which she would have had no time for, really. Far too many, different ingredients. But and added lots of flavors that I've got from my Chinese supermarket, and I love that. And in fact, that seems to me what cooking is about. That you just change some of the flavors and you just take it where you want to go. And
you're a great holiday recruiter, aren't you? A travelling recruiter of ideas. I love that unusual recipe for the cinnamony noodles that you picked up in Thailand. And you talked about getting this guy who made it for you to make it again and again and again while you took notes and finally videoed it.
Actually, I didn't take notes. I videoed it very badly, and I happened to be on holiday too with a documentary filmmaker, and she said, you have to have the phone on landscape when you make a film.
Oh no, so you got a torso and nothing happening.
Because I think, in a way, I just wanted to see what he did and watch and do it, because I knew as well that, here actually you could cook it exactly as I ate it in Thailand. You've got wonderful fresh prawns, and the ingredients you have are much more similar. However, I knew I had to watch what he did, and I'd eaten it a lot so I could remember the taste, but I needed to make it at home in a London kitchen with the ingredients that are available to me. So, frozen prawns, for example.
And mushy peas.
But it still works, and I didn't get those in. I'm not such a heathen.
I know.
But we did have that is interesting. I do that. And when in the old days, when you had to get your camera in, take the film out and give it to the chemist to develop, it was always so embarrassing, because I had like one or two of my children and everything else was a tomato stall in Florence and everything I ate. Whereas at least now, even though I am that very annoying person who says, no, don't touch it yet, I haven't photographed it, I do that non-stop. Nevertheless, at least I don't have to, shame myself at the pharmacy.
Now, we have had a number of questions through on social media, which I've been just
Yep.
greedily and self-centeredly withholding from you, but it does seem like a good opportunity to ask Sheridan Pierce's question. She says, you mentioned in Nigella Feasts that when you travel overseas, instead of buying souvenirs like a tourist, you prefer to go to the local grocers and supermarkets. What Australian food items have caught your eye whilst you've been here? I don't know if you've even got to any.
No, I haven't, but I was on MasterChef for a while, and I went into the kitchen, into the test kitchen. It was lots of, suddenly very lot of bulky things underneath my shirt. Well, in terms of, I mean, I've already told you, not only did I
take... Swiping to the 10 network is not a crime. It's perfectly fine.
Not only did I take some Murray River pink salt, but I also took some wonderful Tasmanian salt. But the other two ingredients are not Australian, but I've never come across them out of Australia, and they seem to be very much in vogue at the moment, was coconut vinegar and white soy sauce. Yeah, so that's interesting.
Oh, good. Well, I look forward to that recipe. Just quickly, being a judge on MasterChef, I mean, it's not the first cooking show you've been a judge on, but you seem very non-judgmental in your writing and your broadcasting. How tricky is it to suddenly just put the boot into people who have made a bad custard or something?
Well, I've never taken part as a judge in a cooking show that was that sort of theatre of cruelty, humiliation. It's always been when the food is discussed, not any person's shortcomings. And also, I do try and be the sort of, I don't know what I would say, sort of simpery smiler and encourager. But I like encouraging. I mean, I find it. I mean, where the difficulty is, in a way, is that I am judging people's cooking when I know I couldn't do that. However, I feel, less people are forced on those programs against their will. I don't feel too bad. But as I say, I couldn't go on a program where the idea was to humiliate anyone or talk in any personal terms. I think actually if you're talking about why you think something worked or why you think it didn't, and you can be quite precise and actually talk about whether you think that there wasn't enough balance of texture, or whether it was undersalted, or whether perhaps it was too concept led. I think that is perfectly all right, because you're trying to do it in a way how you think it could be done. But what's also interesting is that judges often don't agree. So what people also learn about this is that tastes are very subjective. And while that might be confusing, it is also exactly how things are, that it's a miracle, really, that any one person can write a recipe that someone else cooks and likes eating, because not only are tastes subjective, is that what we're learning more and more is that the way our taste buds are varies so enormously from person to person. This new thing about whether you're a super taster or not, and all that.
I'm a super taster at all.
Well,
I think it worries me, that
I think it depends also, everyone varies a lot on the bitter-sweet spectrum. So I love bitter tastes because, to me, they have a wonderful taste. And that may well be because I don't taste them in the same way as we know that children, when they don't like broccoli, it's also because it tastes so much more intense to children. They have many more taste buds, and they just, like everything else, they just start fading.
Yeah, also broccoli's in the memo that they all get, along with Brussels sprouts and...
But you never know.
Do you remember when you had that recipe for, I think it was chicken liver and dried apricots? That was way back, wasn't it?
That was in such a bossy chapter, as one is. Because every book I do is about where I am in my life at that time. And so that, I did have a chapter on how to eat, which was on weaning and feeding infants and toddlers.
You see, my partner went out and invested heavily in chicken livers based on the recipe and an inordinate amount of quite expensive Australian sun-dried apricots, and made about a kilo of this puree.
Yeah, but getting a kilo when you
I know, it was a lot.
Babies have very small
And
tummies.
it is now a story.
Is it still in the freezer?
Probably.
It's not bad, No, but the thing is that
Yes.
the advice I gave in that I still hold by, which is that I gave, all these various, and also you have to get them in very young.
Yes, with the
Okay.
liver particularly, I find.
Yes.
I think we missed our window.
But babies are people. They have their own taste buds. They like certain things more than they like others, but they change quite a bit. So also it can be quite traumatic when you're rejected by by a baby. So maybe you don't try again. But what I was writing about as well is that, especially if I think if you've nursed your baby yourself, then you're used to being its food source. Quite hard to relinquish that, I find, and start having and cooking. But I felt that I never wanted. I was brought up in a very old-fashioned way, where you were forced to eat everything on your plate, and if you didn't, it would be brought back cold at the next meal. And therefore, I never wanted to do that. So I found that the tension of a child not liking the food, a baby not liking a food, and a lot was much easier if I cooked everything in advance and then froze it in ice cube trays, because then all that effort, that love that had gone into it was quite divorced from the meal itself.
Ah, right.
So by
Already
the
in the
time I
bank.
sat down to eat that, I wasn't thinking I'd been here puring apricots and chicken livers all morning, and now you don't like it. So I found that very helpful. So I just wanted to pass that on.
It's interesting to know that about How to Eat, which I, as I said, found a very influential book. But you can trace these phases in your life from reading your cookbooks and the things that you're obsessed with and the ingredients that just crop up again and again.
Yes,
and again.
I was told, a friend of mine calls it the pea, rhubarb and marsala cookbook.
I approve of all of those things, fortunately, for me. But how does that, this is, your 10th cookbook now, this new one?
I know, it's so strange, isn't it?
So I suppose it seems very natural to you, but I guess people who crack it open have their thoughts about what phase you're in and whether they love it or not. And I wonder how you manage that as a writer, people's expectations. And I guess, Avocado Gate, which we all agree was not a gate at all, is an angle of that, I suppose.
Yes.
What people expect of you. Are you affected by that?
No, I'm not, because I think then one step near to that is thinking, oh, what could I do that would be different? And I feel in a way, people often say to me, how is this book different from your other books? And I always go, it's not very different. Not really. And I don't know, because in a way, it's still my voice and it's still the way I like cooking. But there are different approaches or different things are highlighted, I suppose. And I do find I use ingredients over and over again. One of the reasons why I also repeat ingredients in my books, certain ingredients in recipes, is that if I have to go to the shop to buy something in particular, I don't want to go to the shops in vain. So if I've bought something, I want to find other uses for it. So I do give, I will bring it out again and again. And I like those ingredients, a lot of Chinese rice wine, sake, always have to have that. And you buy a bottle of sake, you want to know how it can be used elsewhere. But it's certainly true that, you have found me in very much a caramelized garlic and sweet potato mood. And there's a lot of that going on.
And did that just come out of nowhere or just felt like a caramelized garlic kind of a year?
Well, I used to do it, years ago. That's one thing of, getting to a certain age. It's just like, I wore platforms the first time around. And, the first time around it would have made it in the 40s or in the 14th century. So anyway, I wore them in the 70s and now I wear them again now in the same way as there was a lot of garlic caramelization going on in the early 90s. And I suddenly just thought, I just can't believe I haven't done that again. And I suppose also, as I say, everything is about age and stage. And now I'm older, it's so awful to say, now I'm older, I find raw garlic harder. And so I like that sweetness and richness and the velvetiness you get from roasting it. And also that I think that there is something, I always feel that's like my atavistic refugee mentality, which means, like, for example, if I go to a restaurant that I won't ever give my coat in, because I know I have to be ready to run at any moment. I don't have to wait to get my coat back. And also, I feel much more secure in a house that has food that's been cooked and ready to go. So I roast sweet potatoes, I know I've got a soup there. I roast caramelized garlic, and I know I can just add it to anything and it'll do a lot of flavor. Although, can I recommend, if we're too scarred by avocado gate, that just caramelizing a whole head of garlic and then squeezing it out onto
that's nice.
some toasted sourdough, and then adding some sea salt, parsley if you want.
Yum.
Also, what I do is I do that, and then I chew the parsley after, because my grandmother always taught me that eating parsley gets rid of the smell of garlic, and if you rub it on your hands or eat it, and then you won't go into the office and just blow everyone's heads off. But I think frankly, I think that whole garlic fear comes from an earlier age when garlic seemed like foreign food, whereas actually it's a perfectly nice smell. I mean, it doesn't translate into that.
No, sorry, I wasn't saying because I was not approving of garlic.
Raw garlic, it's just like I don't eat raw onions unless I've macerated them in either vinegar or lime juice when they become that glorious puce. But it's also just actually because, it's not just because I think, it's my new trick. It's because otherwise I can't eat them anymore. So getting old has many benefits. You come across you develop new ideas. You're not convinced, but it's true.
Now, people think of you obviously as a food writer and as a writer of cookbooks, but I mean, you've written about many other things over the course of your career, and you've been a literary editor, you've been an opinion columnist. Do you ever run out of opinions? I run out of opinions sometimes.
Well, I knew it was time to stop really once when I thought, I know I've written on this subject before, I just can't remember which side I took. I always felt it was a bit like, this is something that you might not have much experience of here because it's a different climate, but when you build a fire and you have to put a bit of kindling and it's a bit pathetic and you get the bellows and you go like that and the whole fire erupts. And I felt that being an op-ed columnist sometimes was like having a little German idea that you felt could be true, might not be true, but you thought maybe there was something in it. Then you took the bellows and it became this absolutely strongly held conviction over 1,100 words.
There's an obligation to be shouty, isn't there? It feels like there is, particularly in the 8 to 1,100 word format. I think.
Yes, yeah. I feel that. But when I was on maternity leave, I say maternity leave, obviously it was, if you're a columnist, I don't know what that means. It just means you decide not to write a column for a while. I remember John, my late husband, it's not that you get paid for it. And he, after 2 months, because I'd harangue him, which I'd be reading the newspaper, it's absolutely, just giving him my views about everything that was happening, he said, I think you should go back to work.
Did your past as a shouter make you feel more tolerant when people shout at you or about you?
I completely understand it. I get it completely. I do. I feel that. I tried not. I mean, as I say, I wasn't a tabloid columnist, so I don't feel I was rabble-rousing and that sort of shouting.
They never do.
But I think I overstated the case, or sometimes oversimplified it, or sometimes talked myself into an opinion that maybe afterwards I thought, but not always, but just after maybe after 5 years. But I liked it because there's something very exciting, I think, about really living off your wits. If you don't have an idea, you're not gonna get paid. You're not gonna pay the mortgage and that sort of thing. And I found the fear of that rather galvanizing.
But I guess people would feel that same way about writing a cookbook, wouldn't they? I mean,
of course. It is the same. It is the same, but it's the same. But one is given a subject. And somehow you have to create your own subject when writing a column. And the most thrilling form of that once was when I had a column appearing on, I think it was something like Boxing Day, day after Christmas, and I had to, in those days it had to, things were typeset, you would send it in, and that wasn't going to work, so I had to phone up the copy takers and phone it through, and I knew if I didn't do that, there'd be a hole in the paper. That was thrilling. A white space that I had to
Did
fill.
you go to a phone box and wear one of those hats with a
yeah,
ticket in
I did, and a Mac. No, but
a grubby Mac.
So I do think, but I think that the difference, there is a difference, because you're very reactive as a columnist. So necessarily, it has to be topical. Whereas, and even though in a way, of course, you're still talking about things you can feel very strongly about, that you have to write a column. If you're writing a weekly column, you have to write it whether you feel strongly or not. But if I don't feel I've got the recipes in me or the ideas in me, I don't do a book.
You just go to bed with a bowl of spaghetti
I left
bolognese.
it 3 years, gap before doing this one, because I didn't feel just, I didn't want to churn it out to a degree. You have to churn it out if you're a columnist. When I say to a degree, you just absolutely have to. But you hope you can bring some elegance of thought or some grasp at the truth as you see it, but it doesn't mean to say you always succeed.
Do you think you'll ever get to the end of food as a writer and have another change?
There may well be a time when people are fed up with it, but I certainly enjoy it. I mean, in many ways, I sometimes think it's a self-indulgence because I do enjoy it a lot. I don't know. I had no idea I'd ever have a career related to food in any way. So I don't know what I might do next. I can imagine it, but I think in some sense, it would take more of an act of discipline to make myself stop than anything else.
Was it? I mean, it's in retrospect a sort of a tremendous thing that you did to move into writing about food and then publishing a cookbook. The great restaurantification of the world has increasingly demanded that that chefs are the experts, and that the qualification to comment on food or to create food is somehow associated with hard graft in some clanking commercial kitchen. But what you did was bring home cookery to the fore. And I wonder if that was a struggle for you. I know people, women particularly, I'm afraid, often struggle with the idea of qualification, to declare themselves qualified. And I read a fabulous response that you made once to some critic who disagreed with one of your restaurant columns, early days, and said, well, what's your qualification to be a restaurant reviewer? And you said, my qualification is that somebody is prepared to pay me to do it. Which I thought was a kind of a magnificent response.
Well, I also felt, and I really did, when I was a restaurant critic, I mean, that was probably a slightly obnoxious way of putting it, but what I felt very strongly was that my job was not to represent the chef, but to represent people who might be thinking about, was it going to be worth their going to that restaurant and spending their money there? What would it be like? And I once did have a spat with someone who said, you're not trained, you don't understand. And I said, look, if you decide you are going to open your doors just to professional chefs, fine by me. You're taking money from people who aren't chefs. They have a right to know how your food tastes. It's, there is something that happens a bit with cliques. And as I say, I love restaurants and I admire chefs, but there can come a time when this unquenchable desire for novelty can really not make for the supper you want to eat. And as I say, that I felt I was there, I was a punter. I was going to the restaurant. I didn't, I paid for my meal. I said what I thought of it. And I think that matters, because otherwise it gets to be such an incestuous group that they're friends with the chefs, they go to their houses, they like this, and you never really know whether, you don't know if that's the case. And as I say, I am friends with some chefs. I don't review restaurants anymore. I like the way their minds work often, and I love seeing them cook. But that doesn't mean that those of us who eat their food who haven't worked in professional kitchens don't have a right to offer a dissenting voice.
Is there a sort of team chef and team home cook? I mean, sometimes...
There used to be, but there's much less so. And I've found that, on the whole, the really talented, great chefs completely understand about home food, and they love it, and it's what they like eating. And perhaps the second and third tier are the ones who are immensely contemptuous.
Who are the awful ones? Name them, and we'll boycott them.
I'm not that kind of a person.
I know, but I just wanted to ask to see if you might slip just a tiny bit.
And also, I might not even remember their names. So, you know, but the thing is that there is a difference, and I love the theatre of a restaurant. I love, you know, going out for dinner is a great treat, and it's about various things. It's about how warm the people who work in the restaurant are, the view, the feel of it. I'm not, you know, so many different things. So,
do you go for things in restaurants that you wouldn't make yourself because, or more complicated things? I mean, is that the way you...
Or things that would make my kitchen smell too much.
Right. Or my friend and co-author Wendy Sharp says that she, when she orders out, whether it's takeaway or she goes out, she likes to order something fried because she can't be bothered frying things.
Yes.
You can't get the proper crispness if you're not really out with the thermometers and the double frying. And
yes,
blah, blah,
and
blah.
sometimes yes, so something that needs to be at a much higher temperature than I can get it at. Something that I'm not patient enough to
something
make.
Sous vide.
I know, I don't know, yes. So,
is that over yet? Is sous vide over yet?
Well, I don't really know, I'm glad to say, because I'm not into the whole sous vide world, and I suppose it's sort of trickled down and it's gone sort of everywhere.
I just worry that a food that needs to be laminated first is
Although, can I
effectively...
just say, I did get a laminating machine once, and I greatly enjoyed it was laminating, you know, schedules, children's homework schedules, notes. I've even got some yoga moves laminated with me, because laminating is great fun.
That is the classic behaviour from a laminator honeymoon period person.
Yeah, I know. So laminating is fun.
Yeah.
But, yes, I agree, I don't really want to be laminating my food. Although I can see that if you get those vacuum bags,
yes,
that would be good. You know, I can see, look, the difficulty is, I do love a gadget, but I have got so wise to myself that I know, I mean, I actually haven't been tempted by the sous vide machine, but I know if I got it, it would just be, you know, having to head its way to the charity shop before long. Although, you know, I once compiled my kitchen gadget hall of shame, but even since that time, I bought an electric deep fat turkey fryer, which I've never used.
Well, come on, that's perfectly understandable. Do you have a sort of Moby Dick gadget that, you know, you have 10,000 versions of, but nothing's quite right? I ask because I have a real problem with julienning. I mean, I've never found the perfect julienner.
I have not found the perfect julienne. I have ordered many, even one from Japan. But I think the
But
trouble is
full
this.
of them. Half of them cut my finger off, and the other half just make it all mushy, and it's not quite the right
that
age.
is not good. There used to be an attachment to a food processor that you could get, and I find I can't get it anymore. There was obviously we're going back in time when the food processor was first introduced, when the heyday of the puree and the julienne. I think that is because you and I are probably not safe around mandolins.
No, just the scars. And what happens is, I buy a mandolin, I think this time is going to be different. I use it, I sever a digit, I swear at it, I put it in the bin, and then later I buy another one thinking it's going to be fine, and it never is. But anyway.
I know. Well, perhaps you and I should start for sort of two-pronged attack to get a julienne attachment for a processor.
Let's have a Kickstarter or whatever one of those things is.
We could design our own.
We could.
But the thing is then, I suppose what this tells you is you don't absolutely need to be julienning. What happens is that...
It's not what I'm getting.
But you can do small amounts by hand.
I know, but...
You can have a really small amount, and you don't... How many, you know...
I want Vietnamese family quantity. I want a lot.
Well, that you can do, as it were, by cutting things up and just finally slicing them off.
I know, but I want a julienne kohlrabi. That's what I'm
yeah, well, yes, well, I can see that might pose a problem.
Yeah. Look, I feel like this conversation is really like a large shaggy dog that keeps sort of bounding off, but nicely, I think.
I feel sure it's my fault.
No,
because
I think it's both responsible.
I'm a kind of a bit of a digression diva. On
I
and
love
on
that.
I go.
It's perfectly fine. But I want to just yank on the leash slightly because all this talk about chefs and home cooks reminds me that there is a bit of a gender element to all of this, because
Yes.
chefs are still mainly blokes. And I heard a statistic or some sort of figure mentioned on a Women's Hour broadcast that you did not long ago about the number of cookbooks that are published by men and women in, say, Italy, for instance, where there's only 8 cookbooks published by women or something ridiculous. Chefs tend more to be men. Home cooks tend overwhelmingly in just about every country to be women.
I think that's changing a lot, I would say. Among my friends, I would say that it splits quite a lot between men. Most men seem to be doing the cooking, or at least certainly I would say, not most men, but half, 40 to 50%. And among what are called millennials, I think the divide is completely even. However, I do think you're right about that's why home cooking was looked down on. I think there were 2 reasons. I think that chefs were male, and therefore, obviously, what they did was art, and what women did was kind of not worthy of paying attention to. But I unfortunately think that didn't help. It doesn't help when people deride cooking for being kind of throwback behaviour in women, because of course you've got to investigate why it's all right to denigrate any activity which has been traditionally associated with the female behaviour, because it had to be. I don't think women have any more of a natural inclination towards cooking, although apparently we are better tasters. We have more taste buds than men. I don't know if this is true. I mean, it's just a hypothesis I've seen. But I also think there is. So I think it's a sort of sexist argument. But I also think it's a. I don't know how to put this without sounding like I'm enormously radical, and I hope I do really. But anyway, I think it's a capitalist thing, which is that because chefs were men and were being paid, because it was paid work traditionally, if you were a chef, it was valued, whereas because women worked in the home and weren't actually paid, that was therefore not to be valued. And I think that's a very dangerous way of looking at it generally.
It happens in all sorts of spheres, doesn't it? I mean, if I pay someone to vacuum my house, it's worth X amount an hour, but if I do it myself, it's not worth anything at all, which is one of those weird little glitches in the system.
Yes, although I don't know that, I think also because the person you're going to be paying is likely to be a woman, that is also still considered not creditable work. I don't know. I'm very aware that you can't dislocate attitudes from their historical eras, but you can analyse them, and you can see whether you think they're still in play. And I do think it is very difficult if work that women do, and this is, as I say, I think it is changing with cooking, and I think that, but I think still it is considered, everything is considered more important if you're getting paid for it, and I find it really odd sometimes. I mean, I don't want, whether women change their name or not when they get married is no particular business of mine. On whether you do or you don't, the chances are you have got a man's surname. So. But what I find very, very upsetting is when someone will say to me, oh, well, yes, but you were writer, so you had a name to keep up, and women think that if your name isn't in the public sphere, then it doesn't really matter. And I think that's linked to the same thing about if you're paid for something, it must be valued more.
It's sort of like naming something or paying something.
I don't know, and I just think that... and if you tie that into this age of celebrity and reality TV and these sort of social media images everywhere, I think that I mean, we're going quite away from food, but I think it does make a lot of people feel their life doesn't have value, because if it's not seen on some public forum, and that can't be healthy. It's understandable, but it can't be healthy.
One of your most influential books, How to Be a Domestic Goddess, was all about looking at the unseen, I suppose, wasn't it? About glorifying that tradition of home cooking that
about baking.
Yeah,
just baking, really.
But, I mean, there was a school of thought when you published that book that said that, you were glorifying 1950s women.
Exactly,
so
that's
on.
what I said. So that's when I did feel, look, if you only have to see the book to realise it was a very ironic title. But
people still call you the domestic
I know.
goddess. Does that drive you crazy?
I brought it upon myself, so I can't say it does, but what I really find hard is the self-styled domestic goddess.
Oh,
painful.
Self-styled.
And I made it clear I don't think that, but anyway, so I don't think so, or can I say very long, I don't like the term gastroporn being used against me when I coined the phrase in How to Eat about something entirely other, but never mind. As I say, I bring these things on myself and it doesn't really matter. But I do think, for me, that was a sort of a personal thing when I discovered baking, having always thought the world divided into bakers and cooks, and I was a cook. So I loved that, and I do think it's interesting. It taps into something in human beings, this need for transformation, because of all forms of cooking, baking is the most alchemical. It's so extraordinary to believe this transformation that happens. But, so I'm interrupting you, but I think what you were going to say...
Please.
Anyway, carry on.
Just interesting to see what you now say. So, all right.
Well, no, I was going to, so in other words, whether it was a sort of a retrograde act, but I also, at the time, completely understood that, because a lot of people, a lot of women on the whole, wrote columns about it, and having not seen the book, and I thought that would exactly what I would have done if I was still writing a column. So I didn't fit.
1200 words, bang.
Completely fair.
We have this organisation in Australia called the Country Women's Association, and it's, shout out. And it's a great organisation, and it's an old organisation, and it's having a real resurgence in Australia from young women.
Like the Women's Institute in the UK.
But quite a regional sort of institution. Mm-hmm. But it's a deeply feminist organisation, I think, even though people's idea of it is as some sort of fusty, scone-swapping organisation. But I mean, it's all about women, often in remote areas, getting together and assisting each other under their own steam through whatever's going on in their lives, and supporting each other through food, which is actually quite a radical concept in some ways. And I remember reading some of the commentary and debate around How to Be a Domestic Goddess when it was published, and I remember reading you saying that it was a feminist book because it, and I'm probably horribly paraphrasing, and how fortunate that you are right here and able to correct me.
I probably can't remember, but carry on.
No, but you, from what I recall, your argument was that a sort of a cultural horror of baking among feminists had kind of deprived a generation of women of the pleasures of that particular pastime.
Yes, I think I don't know. I think that I felt what had happened was more that, and quite understandably, that a generation of women, often raised by women whose mothers themselves had fought to escape drudgery or domestic enslavement, quite rightly wanted to steer their daughters away from the kitchen. And I noticed in a lot of my contemporaries that a lot of my girlfriends were very ill at ease in the kitchen, and I felt that no human being should be ill at ease in a kitchen, and it should become a place where, whether male or female, you would want to be. And I still feel that. And I also feel that provided you're not forced to cook against your will, I do really believe that it seems to me to be very strange to want to leave the means of your own survival to someone else. And I don't understand why, if you're a man or a woman, you would feel happy not being able to feed yourself.
Do you feel, looking back over the years since you published that book, that you have changed, or you can take the more modest option of saying that there has been a change in the way women think about cooking in your homeland?
Well, I certainly think that, you know, when I published that, when I said I wanted to do that book, everyone said, you cannot do a baking book. No one bakes. And that's what I wanted to do. And now, you know, baking, you can't move in a bookstore. Not that there are that many bookstores left, but alas, no laughing matter, it's a sad thing, but still, you know, you can't move for baking titles. So, yeah, I think it did make a difference, but, you know, I also was, in some sense, you know, I had noticed in New York, you know, that cafes had cupcakes, and that interested me. So, you know, we're all part of something, and we all come to these ideas kind of simultaneously, maybe.
Now, we are just horrendously running short of time. We've got about 10 minutes left. And
got more questions?
I do. I've got hundreds more. I mean, really, we could have a lock-in, but we do have social media questions, and I'll ask another one of those in a moment. But one very widely commented upon aspect of your new book is that it has lots of healthy recipes in it, right? And I know that the word healthy and the word clean...
Yeah, but I understand what you mean.
So is that a change in you, or is it a change in what you perceive people's appetites to be at the moment?
There's an awful lot of that in all my books. It's just maybe it stands out more now, maybe because... I don't know, you know, for example, one of my books has got a whole chapter called Temple Food, as in
love that chapter.
My body is a temple. So I've always done these things. I think what it is that people have, maybe this is true, people think that all I do is sit around and eat chocolate cake. So the fact is...
And then order more sheets. More sheets!
And, no, I think I have to wash them. I can't be ordering more sheets.
I'll tell you what, there's a very good chocolate cake in your new book, and it's entirely vegan chocolate cake.
Yes.
And it's fiendish. It's so delicious.
And I guess I'm rather excited by that too. But the reason I don't call it vegan in the title is that I feel that it's just wonderful on its own. But so I feel I've always had a mixture of, you know, there's been chocolate cake and there has been, you know, lots of fish and broccoli, as it were. And I like both. And I really try not to have that hierarchy, this is good and this is bad, or this is better. You know, I really try and eat the food I want to eat, or that I feel is right at the time.
Right, but you know the best-selling cookbooks in Australia right now, and I'm sure this is true wherever good food is eaten, are the ones that are telling you how to give something up, or how to observe a set of rules. For instance, you know, don't eat anything that Paleolithic man would not have stumbled across in the course of his daily life.
Exactly.
I wonder about that one.
Yes, I know. Well, I think that has been discredited, but obviously, look, if you give...
Careful, we're in Sydney.
If you
can't say paleo's been discredited, people get cross and they're very hungry, so they're, you know, lean and like, muscular.
Now, look, the point is, if you start focusing on what you eat and giving up certain food groups, you might eat less, you might feel better if you've been overeating, and all these things hold true, especially, you know, it depends on how you started off eating. But what these books also implicitly promise is, eat this and you will be immortal. You won't get a disease, you won't die. And that, I'm afraid, no diet can give you. So I think, look, I want to feel well. I'm my children's only parent. I also want to feel that I've got energy. But I don't think that if I, you know, give up gluten and never again have, a piece of cake that it's going to be plain sailing and I have nothing to worry about. And some people cannot eat these things. There is a huge rise in food intolerances, and I understand why a bit more now, but nevertheless, I do think at the base of it is, that's always been the human's holy grail, which is eternal life. You may as well just, enjoy eating in this one, I think.
Some of these diets and ways of eating, though, take on almost moral, biblical proportions. They're about the struggle between good and evil,
Indeed.
and some ingredients are evil and so on. And they change, of course, because something terrible one minute will be terrific the next.
Yes.
But it's about control, isn't it? I mean, it's a struggle between, controlling food or being controlled by food.
Yes.
Has there ever been any doubt in your relationship with food about who wears the pants?
I think that I'd say that I have, when I was younger, I think I found food more problematic, both not liking to eat when I was very small and then feeling at some stage perhaps my greed got the better of me. But two things have kept me, relatively speaking, normal. And one is that my mother had a very, very unhappy relationship with food, and I didn't want to be that person.
And did you realise and spot that early on, do you think?
I do remember. She died when she was 48, and I remember her saying, when she knew she was terminal, which is, wasn't, that, it was the first time she ever ate without anxiety. And if you have to wait till you're terminally ill to allow yourself to eat, that made a huge impression on me. And also because I have witnessed quite a few people dying of cancer, I don't equate thinness necessarily with health. So for me, it's slightly different. I think, obviously, there are times I have, especially as a young woman, I think I struggled more. But I think even then, I tried as best as I could not to ban food. Because I know, because I've got quite an obsessive nature, all I do would be to think about it and want to eat it, and try as much as possible to have as healthy a relationship as I could with food. But as in with all relationships, I have my good patches and my bad patches. But I've been on a good patch for quite a long time now.
Do you ever run out of things to cook? I'm
incredibly boring for weeks on end.
Right. But do you ever walk into that kitchen and have that moment that I have all the time? I cook all the time, just obsessively. And then sometimes I walk into the kitchen and think, what do I cook again? I can't think of one thing that I cook. What do I cook? I can't think of anything. Do you have those sort of mental blocks ever? Sorry,
I don't have that, but I do sometimes feel that I can get stuck in a rut, but I have ways of overcoming that.
What are they?
Overcoming the rut. Well, what I started doing is like getting a box of vegetables rather than choosing, because I thought, so then I had to think a bit creatively and suddenly think, what am I going to do with this? I've got to think of something new, otherwise I get the same vegetables all the time. And lovely though that is, I just thought, no, I just can't do that. But I don't mind too much repetition. That's partly what makes us feel safe in the world. When children are small, they love having the same stories read to them all the time. And if they start watching, a DVD or whatever thing, they want to watch it over and over again.
And when they know the story, then they know when you're missing bits as well. It's just shocking.
So I think that is also part of, who we are and what we do. But every now and then I do like to do something completely different, and I do, sometimes it just means not buying the same ingredients, but that can be harder in itself.
Now, I've so vilely ignored our social media correspondence that I feel I have to compensate
And I feel
by throwing
I
one
talk
in.
too much. I go on and on.
You're right.
Sorry.
It's her fault, social media, not mine. Direct all your... No, don't, obviously. Now, look, there's one here from Felicity Stewart, which I think is representative of particularly a lot of women who admire you and who have watched your career. Dear Nigella, this is quite a tough question, but, you know, I'm going to throw you at it. As a woman of great poise and stoicism, what are the biggest lessons you have learned from building your beautiful food empire? And what are your words of advice for aspiring female leaders and entrepreneurs?
Well, I don't have a food empire at all. It's just me at home with... but, you know, with one full-time person working for me. So
it's a bit empire-ish.
So it's what? So my feeling is, I mean, it's I feel you just have to go ahead and do things that you want to do and you think are right, because, you know, clearly we all make mistakes, so you may as well make mistakes doing what you feel you should be doing, rather than making mistakes feeling that you're doing what other people want you to be doing. I mean, I really think you just have to try and be yourself. It takes a long time. It takes a long time. You have to work out who you are, and I feel that's a life's work.
You seem to have a capacity not to be annoyed by things. I mean, I was interested to hear you say that you were terribly cross about people calling you the domestic goddess.
I didn't get terribly cross. Yeah, I couldn't. I did bring it on myself.
You're not much of a grudge holder then, I guess.
Try not to be. I try not to be a grudge holder. I also feel that... in a way, if you hold grudges, you just make yourself feel so miserable. And look, I don't know how, but I managed to forget these things in the same way as as someone who used to be quite thin-skinned and can get quite upset, I'm very good about, you know, I don't read reviews of things, or if sometimes I can go down that wormhole if someone puts a link on Twitter, but mostly I'm quite strong and I just don't do it. I feel also that it's so important to be a person who looks out onto the world and not be an object that you gaze on yourself. That would seem to me to be a very wizened and desiccated life.
Well, I must say, having gazed upon you for 90 minutes now, and it went horribly quickly, and that little screen says very threateningly, 0 seconds remaining.
But it's said it for a while.
I know it has. And I can see its little shape blinking at me out of my peripheral vision, and now it's probably time for me to obey it. Thank you for coming all the way to Australia. As you can see, you have a ludicrously enthusiastic following here who have been following you and admiring you for years, myself included. I love to hear you talk about food, and most of all, I love to read you writing about food, and I'm so pleased that in this book you continue to do it. Would you all please...
But can I just ask you if I could do something really infantile and nerd-like? Because I would love to take a picture of you all.
Sing!
Do you mind? Don't know if I can get a signal.
Capture your audience.
Okay, I do, because this is such a thrill for me.
Form yourself with your bodies into the word Nigella.
I can do it. I'm going to have to do it on video, aren't I? I can't do panorama in a circle. Anyone know whether I can do panorama on a circle? Yes or no? Tell me, someone.
Video. It has to be video.
A video. Thank you. Okay. Hey. Thank you.